flow of time itself is convoluted, with heroes' central poles phasing in and out.
Welcome back to Honored Madman. I hope everybody's doing well. Today we're going to be talking about returning bosses and NPCs that we're probably going to be seeing in the new spin-off of Elden Ring, NightReign. Already a bit of a controversial title even before its release. The game features a number of returning enemies, namely from Elden Ring, people like the Godric Soldier and the Beastmen of Farum Azula, even rare stuff like the Hero of Zamor, and I think one of them golden hippopotamuses from the DLC. The game's probably going to have quite a few reused Elden Ring bosses. I mean, that's only to be expected. But chief among them appears to be the demigod Margit the Fell, or at least the alter ego of the demigod Morgott. And from what I've read, he's apparently going to function a bit like the Pursuer from Dark Souls 2, in that he's sort of just going to pursue the player or players around the map. From what I've read, he seems like a fairly common event boss because the interviewer mentioned that he showed up a few times and that he was actually able to lure Margit to a side of grace, which works like the warmth pyromancy from Dark Souls 2 and 3 in that it heals you over time. So they basically fought Margit while having a passive heal effect on them the entire time, which I guess sounds like a fun way to use the game's mechanics to your advantage. Now, obviously, we've talked about a lot of the lore for some of these Elden Ring characters, especially Margit and the Heroes of Zamor I've even talked about really early on. But there's a number of returning bosses from previous Souls games that I haven't really talked about in depth on this channel, and now seems like as good a chance as any to, discuss them a little bit. There's also a couple of characters who are returning from previous games, or at least appear to be returning from previous games, that don't necessarily seem to be bosses. In one case, it seems like they're a playable character, and in the other, they're an NPC, but we'll get the bosses out of the way first. So, returning from the very first Dark Souls game is the Centipede Demon. Now, this bad boy it has a pretty simple origin story. It was actually born from a ring, so it's sort of a funny story. We all know the Witch of Izalith from the first Dark Souls game. She had one of the Lord's souls, and she had several daughters who were witches. Well, she also had one son who was cursed with these horrific lava sores. It was the witch's youngest child, no less. And naturally, his sisters, the other witches, came up with this ring for him to wear that would ease the pain of his lava sores, the constant spewing of lava coming out of him, the ceaseless discharge, if you will. But apparently this dude was like the Chris Farley of Dark Souls or something, because when they handed him the ring, it slipped out of his hand and he dropped it into the lava, and out emerged the Centipede Demon. It said that the ring became the demon. Now, I don't think this happened right away. I think it happened probably after the Witch of Izalith experimented on that flame to create the Chaos Flame, creating all the other demons and making everybody mutate and consuming two of her daughters and turning them all into the bed of chaos, leaving Quilana as the only surviving child of chaos. The Centipede Demon is just sort of like a Gate Guardian style boss. There's not a whole lot to him lore-wise, and really not that much to him fight-wise either. He's got two heads, which is certainly interesting, and I'm guessing they're going to be using the Ramana skeleton to recreate him in NightReign, although I don't know if the Elden Ring version will include the best part of this boss fight, which is cutting off its head. Well, one of them. As many of you may already know, the second head can be cut off pretty easily, and it drops that lava walking ring I mentioned earlier, the one that created the Centipede Demon. And this is because Dark Souls 1 is a dope-ass game where usually if you cut a piece off of a boss, then you get a cool little goodie in return for doing something cool and making use of the in-depth game mechanics that the developers have provided. That definitely wasn't a FromSoft ad read, I promise. It was merely an endorsement for Dark Souls 1 and why, if you haven't played it, you should. Now, before I get into the next entry, I wanted to mention that I noticed there wasn't much of a Sekiro presence in the trailer. Now sure, it looks like they're going to be incorporating some of the gameplay mechanics from Sekiro, like the deflection and stuff like that, and little gauntlet type things. But it was just odd I didn't see any returning bosses from such a recent FromSoft game. From the sound of the game though, it's going to be like this 3-day survival period, and like after each day the map shrinks because the influence of the night encroaches or whatever, it shrinks the map. And at the end of each day, you have to fight a boss, and then at the end of the final day, you have to fight a Night Lord or something to that effect. Could be the one that the Nox are waiting for. But anyway, on to the next returning boss. Now this one is from Dark Souls 2 and is technically one of the old ones, but think of that as having a little asterisk next to it. So this boss is known as the Duke's Deer Freya, and it started out his life as a regular little spider, a pet of a criminally insane nobleman. His actual name is lost to history. What is known is that he was a duke and his lands were known as Seldora. And on these lands he made a pretty crazy discovery, these bright stones, these giant, white, extremely bright crystals jutting out of the earth. Or at least, maybe he found traces of them and then he began his whole excavation process, as we can see in present-day Seldora. He seemed to really have a thing for crystals, but it paled in comparison to his love of bugs. Scorpions, butterflies, but most of all, spiders. He was bug obsessed, so much so that he even made a couple of scorpion people, just like how Seath the Scaleless, who was also a Twisted Duke, made a bunch of dragon-human hybrids in the form of the Snake Men. And possibly Priscilla as well, who some claim he directly fathered, but I think he more than likely just created her through some messed up ritual, which I guess would technically make him her father if it were true, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, this Duke of Seldora is sort of like this spiritual successor to Seath the Scaleless, and his mutated pet spider with the giant crystal growing out of its back seems to be the more literal successor. His land also turned out to be a dragon burial ground, and the petrified dragon carcass that was directly beneath Seldora seems to be the root cause of the Brightstone Cove's famous bright stones. Unfortunately, the land was left half excavated, possibly because the Duke and all of his subjects have hollowed out. The Duke's main domain now is totally infested by Freya's offspring, and that kind of reminds me of these spiders in the Forest Temple of Twilight Princess, but it's probably just a coincidence. Anyway, back to the native dragon burial grounds. So this guy discovered that deep beneath his lands there was an ancient dragon corpse. Now this wasn't just any, this was the corpse that had inherited the piece of the Lord Soul that was once possessed by the old Pale Drake himself, Seath the Scaleless. One of the iconic bearers of a Lord Soul from the first Dark Souls game, the betrayer of the ancient dragons. He was this dude who was essentially born bald. He had no unbreakable scales, so he turned on all the other dragons because they did have them, and they probably mocked him for not having them. So this dragon corpse that's beneath Brightstone Cove likely is the inheritor of Seath's Lord Soul. For whatever reason, it's dead. It likely either died a long time ago or perhaps reincarnated dead, which wouldn't make much sense. Or it was found partially alive and killed by the forces of the Duke. Now, interesting enough, this the drool from this dragon corpse formed this crystal thing, which is presumably what the Duke used to bring about such experiments as the man-scorpion Tark and his wife. But we're supposed to be talking about Freya. So Freya was this spider that was the Duke of Seldora's pet, and he eventually hollowed out and just stayed in his study, remained a mindless hollow with a rapier. Now, sometime after this, his pet spider chewed its way out of its cage and presumably found its way into that boss room with the dead dragon and the crystal and began feeding on the dragon corpse. This made it the new inheritor of Seath's soul and the old one's soul. It also made it grow to a monstrously large size and sprout scales of stone, just like the everlasting dragons that it, inherited its soul from. I actually really like this boss. Now, people always bring up Dark Souls 2 as having not the best bosses, but I do think this is one of the better ones, and it's not a big armored guy, which is another of Dark Souls 2's biggest criticisms towards its bosses, that they're all dudes. They're all big, metal armored guys. And this is just a nice change of pace. It's a giant stone-armored spider with two heads, one on opposite sides like fucking cat dog. And it shoots fucking lasers. Now, most of its attacks are pretty easy to dodge, and as long as you have a torch out, you don't gotta worry about the lesser offspring spiders attacking you at all. I wish the spider-like boss fight in Bloodborne had something similar to keep the spiders off your ass, because that was the most annoying part of fighting Rom. And it's really interesting that Elden Ring is finally going to give us some sort of a spider boss, because it didn't have any. You know, it had giant ants, no bosses. It had giant scorpions, and then Ramona, who was like this scorpion centipede thing, which was admittedly pretty cool. She was like this combination of Quelaag and the Scorpioness Najpka or whatever from Dark Souls 2, all mixed into one. It was a fun time. I like the Ramona fight. I still got to do a video on all the DLC bosses. But moving on to the most recognizable and iconic of these returning bosses, in my opinion, and probably in the opinions of most people, the Nameless King, the firstborn of the sun himself. Now, in the base game of Dark Souls 3, this guy is probably my favorite boss. He's not too hard to fight. He's got this grand fucking entrance he makes. He's got this whole, side quest thing you have to do to get to his zone. And he's literally Gwyn's son, this character that had been mentioned in descriptions since Dark Souls 1, but we never really knew what his deal was, and we finally get to face him in Dark Souls 3. It was a great moment. So the story behind the Nameless King here is that his name was erased. And that was because, as Gwyn's son, he was one of the gods of Anor Londo, and in particular, he was a god of war. He led the Dragon Knights and fought alongside Gwyn against the ancient dragons until one day he turned his back on his own kind and sided with the dragons. No one really knows why this is. People have speculated that it's because he's Priscilla's father, or because he saw in dragons some sort of path to enlightenment. There's not really an agreed upon story there, but what is known is that he was essentially the black sheep of the Anor Londo gods family, and because of that, Gwyn cast him out. I mean, he's essentially the Danny Rayburn of the family. If you've ever watched the show Bloodline on Netflix, I don't think many people have. I think I only watched the first season, so I don't even know why that reference was in my head, but you get what I mean. He hangs out in Archdragon Peak, or I guess he currently resides there now, protecting the remnants of the ancient dragons. And of course the little meditating reindeer dragon men that we see all around. And the Nameless King, like the other two bosses I mentioned, is pulled into this alternate version of Limgrave called Limveld from, these other worlds, these other universes, in this case, the Dark Souls universe. Now, I think from the looks of what I've seen, they're probably going to be like one of the end-of-day bosses. I don't think they'll be the Night Lord, obviously. That'll be something different. But they're going to be probably like end-of-day bosses, or maybe even event bosses if you go to a certain thing, or maybe a meteor hits and alters the map. That makes a different boss from a different game show up, perhaps. And that's not even including all the unique bosses that NightReign is going to have. I mean, there's that three-headed wolf Cerberus who can split itself into three separate wolves. There's that crumbling centaur dude. There's a lot of cool stuff. I mean, I'm just interested in fighting more unique bosses. Now, that being said, they have unveiled, I believe, 4 of the playable classes. The first one is a warrior named Wilder. I believe he's the dude with the great sword who's running wearing the blue cloaked armor or whatever. He's probably basically like your quality build kind of play style. He swings with a great sword. He hits hard but not too hard, and he can, he can still move on his feet. The next one appears to be some sort of a bird-headed dude, which looks like it might be a lot of fun. The next one is the quintessential soulsborne witch character. Someone inspired by Yuria or Carla or Zully, a classic staple in the FromSoft series. She's definitely going to be the more magic-based out of the playable characters, at least out of these 4 that we know of so far. Now, the last of the ones that they've unveiled to us appears to be something of a returning character, or at least is inspired by a previous FromSoft character named Lady Maria. This playable class is called the Duchess, interestingly enough, and perhaps her name's going to be Duchess Maria, or Duchess Marie, or perhaps Duchess Mariah. Essentially a legally distinct, copyright-free version of Lady Maria from the Bloodborne games, because Sony owns the rights to those characters, not FromSoft. And it's not like Sony would ever allow, their own intellectual property to appear on anything other than a PlayStation. So for legal purposes, we got this character, the Duchess, and she appears to fight exactly like Lady Maria. Well, not exactly. I don't think she uses bloodbending, but, wouldn't it be cool if she did? The Elden Ring game itself has the mechanics for it, so why not? She could be the more arcane-oriented character, which is a way a lot of people like to play. Masters of the occult, if you will. But she doesn't appear to come with her trick weapon. She seems like she's going to dual-wield short swords or a dagger and a regular-sized sword. They don't appear to be katanas either. But as far as the outfit and the general vibe and atmosphere of this character goes, she's clearly heavily inspired and probably an homage to Lady Maria from Bloodborne. Now, aside from playable characters, there's also going to be a number of non-playable characters who might have little side quests or little things we could do for them, just lore drops perhaps at the very least. And we haven't really seen a whole lot of them. We only had that one little trailer and whatever information has been released to us since. But in the trailer, there was one that really stood out, and I don't think I'm the first to acknowledge this. I think everybody collectively noticed who this was. It appears to be the Firekeeper from Dark Souls 3. She's, of course, wearing her hood here, and she doesn't usually wear it in the base game of Dark Souls 3. But she was a pretty important character there as well, and she appears to be talking in part of the voiceover for this trailer to the whoever the player is, or to somebody, basically saying that she needs their help. The classic Princess Leia of the story. Now, we all know the Dark Souls 3 Firekeeper. She's the one who levels us up, and at one point she had her eyes taken from her because she saw a, quote, horrible thing. And if you return her eyes to her, she plays a big part in one of the main endings for Dark Souls 3, where the two of you sort of just let the flame fade. I think, or do they snuff it out? I might have to revisit that particular ending, because now I'm drawing a blank. I know, as a lore channel, that might be egregious to even hear. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about the returning bosses and some of the returning characters that might be showing up in NightReign. I know a lot of people are still on the fence, and I mean, you should be. That's rightfully so. But I also see a lot of people jumping the gun and saying, oh, it's going to be live service, microtransactions, when the guy has come out and said that he's not going to have anything like that. Now, we don't know if that's going to be the case when the game ships, though, so, it's definitely good to still be skeptical. What I worry about is what it's going to take to unlock some of these skins, and if maybe Bandai Namco might feel inclined to create some sort of a fast way for people to unlock skins. Now, that might turn into some sort of a microtransaction thing, but honestly, who knows? I mean, From Software hasn't done it in the past, so I mean, who's to say why they would now? Maybe they just really don't want to leave any money on the table. I know Japanese corporations are, penny pinchers, never ones who want to necessarily leave money on the table, but FromSoft's been pretty good about it so far. I haven't really seen much of any kind of cash grabby behavior from them. Shit, my only complaint is that the last time they did skins or alternate outfits like that was in Sekiro, where you had to unlock them, and they didn't carry over into New Game Plus, which was just ridiculous. What's the point of even getting them, honestly? And I don't think we'll be having that same problem here given the nature of this game and how it's going to be in these 3-day sessions or whatever. So I'm not really too worried. But again, as always, share your thoughts in the comments because I like hearing your guys' insight. And a big example of that is in the most recent video I did about Mikola and Radon. I spent the entire video coming at it from this literal common sense standpoint of just, they wouldn't make sense. They just don't go together. And yeah, of course that's valid, but so many other people analyze philosophically why they don't work and why it's tragic and why they shouldn't work out, but that's the whole point. And man, I should have looked at it from that angle too, because those were awesome. A lot of those write-ups were really, really well done. You guys should all have YouTube channels if you're that good at coming up with write-ups. Anyway, though, I hope you guys found the video to be amusing or entertaining, and if you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble on about these various lore topics and new upcoming games and possibly the occasional movie, please consider subscribing. And on the off chance that you feel like helping to support the channel, I will link my Patreon in the description. It helps out a lot, but I do know that times is tough right now. Anyway, enough of all that. Let's have our outro and then the final thoughts and some hints at what's coming up next. So yeah, in a way, there are some truly random picks for these returning bosses. Some are fitting, like with Margit the Fell, like it makes sense he'd be hunting people down like the Pursuer. The Duke's Deer is a good choice in my opinion because of how unique it is in the specific game it debuted in. It's this giant two-headed spider with armored dragon scales, in a game full of, in my opinion, very good but very common giant knight fights. It's a standout in the game. It's not exactly a hard boss fight, but it still stands out as pretty memorable. It really always reminded me of the boss of the Temple of Time in Twilight Princess, a game I need to cover more often. But then there's some choices that make less sense in my opinion, because look, like the Centipede Demon is a decent mechanic boss with a really cool design, but it's still, you know, a pretty odd choice. It's not exactly a super memorable boss from Dark Souls, or is it really iconic? Not that those two things even really matter when it comes to bringing back an old boss. I think the most likely reason that we're seeing it is because it's a pretty easy asset flip from the Ramana boss fight from the DLC, at least her Centipede lower half. That can't have been too hard to make into a NightReign version of the Centipede Demon. Just my opinion though. Obviously the Nameless King is probably the best one out of all the returning bosses, but I doubt I'm the first person to say that. He's really the best boss in a game full of really good bosses. I mean, Dark Souls 3 has some pretty good ones. And of those, I always look forward to fighting the Nameless King the most, because his fight, it has all this gravitas to it, because it's, you know, it's so grand. You're fighting him in the eye of a storm, he comes in riding his Drake, you kill his Drake, then he, you know, absorbs it like Ornstein and Smo, and his one-on-one fight is fucking cinematic. I mean, I can't think of a better boss fight in the base game of Dark Souls 3, but the DLC might be a different story. Gale might take the cake there. But at this point, I'm probably just repeating myself in the final thoughts section, so, what we got coming up next is probably the Black Knife Assassins video and what's going on with them. It should be a pretty long one. It's like halfway done so far. There's still a few more theories I want to work through, but it should be done, you know, pretty soon. I've got all the footage I need, and then I'm going to finish up that Prospect video I've been wanting to do. And I know I always say this at the end of these videos, that I'm going to cover a different TV show, and one day I think I will get to covering them all, but I might do a little video on the Dexter prequel series they're doing, because I had the lowest expectations going into that, and it was actually pretty decent. It was not terrible. I actually found it kind of enjoyable. It seemed to understand the campy tone of the earlier season of Dexter. In my opinion, at least, it may have overdone it a little bit, but I enjoyed the hell out of stuff like that. Anyway, I'm probably just rambling at this point, so I will see you guys really soon when I come back with that Black Knife video. Then I got that one on those Dark Souls 2 enemies. There's a lot of good stuff coming. So until next time, I hope everybody stays safe and, you know, drive safe out there. There's a lot of crazy drivers I've been seeing lately. Anyway, though, see you next time, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you for lending an ear to my ramblings. Go along and resume your journey.